This morning, can invite some of y'all in the back. Y'all, when y'all get your coffee and everything, come on over and sit. I'm going to invite anybody coming in, sit on my right over here, so we start filling up a little bit over here. It's good to see you all here this morning at 11:11. It's great to see you guys online with us, joining in on 11:11 downtown in Fort Worth. I'm Tom McDermott, the pastor of this community, and so glad that you're joined in online as well as here. I'm guessing a whole lot more of you are online today than are actually present in here, and I'm guessing it just occurred to me this morning, it costs probably $5 to $20 for you to come to church today. Some of you, it probably cost $5 to $20 just to get down to church today. So I'm glad that you showed up for that. Also, it was probably a little discouraging, the fact that it's already close to 100 degrees outside. And you know how it is in wintertime. It gets cold, it gets freezing, nobody wants to get out. I'm guessing maybe that's some of that. You're sitting there with your iced tea. You're in front of a fan or AC. So I'm glad you're with us in here, and I'm glad you're with us online. A couple of quick things. Register your attendance online so we know you're with us. And if you're visiting with us, especially we'd like to know that. We've had a lot of interaction on social media lately, so I'm actually thinking we probably do have some folks visiting with us, and we're glad you're here. Also, in here, register your attendance. You bring it forward in, the routine as we do the singing in a little bit, along with your offerings, which we appreciate so much to continue the support of the church. Speaking of the church, a couple of things really quickly. This weekend begins our annual conference. So, however you go to prayer, however you sit and focus quietly and allow yourself to be caught up in spirit, however you do that, I would really hope you'll do that for the church this afternoon and for Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday as we start to work through our business. Our annual business. It'll be our first time to meet in almost 3 years, I think it is. And so we'll be meeting and hosting the whole group of 700 and some odd people here at the main church building for 2.5 to 3 days. It's also a tense time, as you already know, because of the churches that are already looking at disaffiliating with the denomination, which we are not splitting. Again, we see it in the media. We're not splitting. United Methodist Church remains United Methodist Church, always with the widest possible table for folks to join and gather at. And yet, there are some folks that are trying to discern whether or not they're going to be leaving. So it's a difficult time, and some of that tension will no doubt be present. So we're going to try to keep a spirit of generosity and kindness present above all. Remember how we're all connected and grounded together. Keep us in your thoughts. Other thing I want to mention is that on the 25th of this month, our own senior pastor for so many years, I can't even count how many years, it's been, I think, about 19 years, Tim Brewster, who, by the way, people, is with us this morning. Isn't that nice? Yeah. I wasn't going to mention it, but you just have such a great smile on your face, I can't help but notice that you're here, and I'll be thinking about it all morning. So it's good to have you with us. We're having an all-service celebration at the 9:30 hour. So good. Guess what? You can come early on that Sunday and join in on that joint service over there and celebrate Tim's last message to us, and also just his ministry and all the goodness he's done here with his ministry and his open arms and his great sort of compassion for a wide way of understanding who God and how we come to God. And so we're going to really celebrate that with him as well. I hope you can be there. 25th. 2 Sundays from now. Then you can hang around, go get some donuts, come back at 11:11. Oh my gosh, it's the 26th. Yes. Don't come on the 25th. Okay. But the 25th, by the way, happens to be the Trinity Pride Fest. And so that's happening in Magnolia, on the Magnolia Green. And we haven't really done much in the past. This year we're doing more and more. And so if you want to volunteer with me, there'll be several of us helping to set up the markers for marking off the streets. There'll be some of us working with stage. There's stuff happening all morning and afternoon, but we're going to be working the morning to early afternoon, right after lunch shift. So if you'd like to do that, there's information on your bulletin. You can find that bulletin on your phone, information online. Email me soon if you want to be a part of that. The other thing that you might want to be a part of is Project Transformation, which we've been doing every year at this church for years and years. And it's a wonderful work. It's a wonderful service that helps children with literacy and with reading comprehension, and it's a volunteer situation for a couple of days. You take a 2-hour block and then volunteer for that time. Ava Nell, which I don't see, oh, there she is right here in the front. Ava Nell is one of the folks that you can sign up with. You can get information on our church website about that. It's a fun experience. You go over to the school and you read with these kids in different groups, and you listen to them read and process what they're reading. And it's just a lot of fun to engage in this way. The actual the actual consequence of this is pretty phenomenal. The literacy rates are really, you can really see the difference throughout the year according to their studies afterwards, their research afterwards. So it makes a huge difference to do this. So it's a great way to volunteer and be a part of your community in different ways. Hope you will sign up for that. Check with Ava Nell, who I know she's already talked to some of you. All right, so that's the main thing we want to talk about here this morning. I want you to do something here while you're online as well. I want you to think about a couple of quick questions. The first question is, are you a dog or a cat person? Okay, I'm serious. Are you a dog or a cat person or both? Or neither? Okay? Neither because you just hate animals, okay, right? I mean, neither. Maybe you're neither. Okay, I'm just kidding. So if you're a dog person, or just think about, are you a dog person or a cat person? Second question is, what does your pet say about you? You know, you can tell a lot about a person by the pet they keep. Not just the company, but the pet they keep. So what is your pet? What do you think your pet says about you, right? And then the third thing is a leap. A leap. What does it say about your view of God? All right, let's begin.
On a sleepy, endless ocean, when the world lay in a dream, there was rhythm in the splash and roll, but not a voice to sing. So the moon fell on the breakers, and the morning warmed the waves, till a single cell did jump and hum, for joy as though to say, this is my home, this is my only home, this is the only sacred ground I have ever known. Should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Then the day shone bright and rounded, till the one turned into two, and the two into 10,000 things, old things into new. And on some virgin beach, one lonesome critter crawled, and he looked about and shouted out in his most astonished drawl, this is my home, this is my only home, this is the only sacred ground I have ever known. Should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Then all the sky was buzzing, and the ground was carpet green, and the weary children of the woods went dancing in between. And the people sang rejoicing when the fields were glad with grain, this song of celebration from their cities on the plain. This is my home, this is my only home, this is the only sacred ground that I have ever known. Should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Now there's smoke across the harbor, and there's factories on the shore, and the world is ill with greed and will and enterprise of war. But I'll lay down my burdens in the cradle of your grace, and the shining beaches of your love, and the sea of your embrace. This is my home, this is my only home, this is the only sacred ground that I have ever known. Should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden.
It's already lit. Just kidding. Hi. If you're joining us at home, go ahead and light your candles. What? Knocking it out of the park. Good morning. There we go. Come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you've broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again.
I love this service so much. Folks, let's stand and sing together, would you please? And this is a perfect time to bring your offering up here to the table. Elena's going to lead this song. Let's rock it together, folks. Right here. Let's go.
Today, as you greet one another, look at each other, say, here's the dog I have, or here's the cat I have, and then just look at them when they say that and go, uh-huh. And then you tell them yours, all right? That way you can see, does their dog actually match who they are, all right? So greet one another with signs of peace and your pet.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. I love to see everybody visiting. It makes me so happy. I'll be sharing with the scripture with you guys today. This is the first time for me, so bear with me. Today we'll be reading from Exodus 33, 15 through 23. I'll give you a little context for the message. We're at the point in the Exodus story where the Israelites are many years in exile. After escaping Egypt, they are coming close to what they hope is the promised land, but we all know how that story goes. But Moses goes back up to the mountain to ask God and know that God will be with him. So Moses said, "If your presence doesn't take the lead here, call this trip off right now. How else will it be known that you're with me in this, with me and your people? Are you traveling with us or not? How else will we know that we're special, I and your people among other people on this planet Earth?" God said to Moses, "All right, just as you say. This also I will do, for I know you well, and you are special to me. I know you by name." Moses said, "Please, let me see your glory." God said, "I will make my goodness pass right in front of you. I'll call out the name God right before you. I'll treat you well, whomever I want to treat well, and I'll be kind to whomever I want to be kind. But you may not see my face. No one can see me and live. Look, here is a place right beside me. Put yourself on this rock. When my glory passes by, I'll put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I'll take my hand away, and you'll see my back, but you won't see my face." The next passage we'll be sharing is John 14 in the Message version. Philip said, "Master, show us the Father, then we'll be content. Whatever you request in this way, I'll do. If you love me, show it by doing what I've told you. I will talk to the Father, and he'll provide you another friend, so that you will always have someone with you. This friend is the Spirit of truth. The godless world can't take him in because it does not have eyes to see him, doesn't know what to look for. But you know him already, because he has been staying with you and will even be in you."
Kagan wrote for us this beautiful entry into our time of Kairos together today. And so it should be on the screen. So we will do this as a congregational response with one another. I wake each morning and remind myself that all things are sacred, holy, and worthy of love and curiosity. Like a water droplet in the ocean, each of us plays a role far too big for us to see. And on days when my heart is shrouded by confusion, I will passionately seek the hidden wholeness in every moment.
So we take this time that we come into Kairos, which is that time with sort of in between times, right? It's really that chance to sort of try to step out of the busyness of what's been going on, or carrying the histories and the past that we bring with ourselves, and the anxieties that we might also carry because we're thinking about what's up, what's coming next, or what time it is, or when things are going to move to the next thing. Our impatience triggers all the time. So this is a time really to allow the singing bowl, the tone, to simply invite us into a focus. So I invite you to close your eyes if that's easier for you to focus, or to look at a point on the floor or in front of you, and to just take deep breaths slowly and exhale slowly. And as you do, perhaps just count 5 inhale, 6 exhale, and with each one maybe add a second or two. We'll do that about 3 times or so as the bowl sings for us.
O Holy One, in the beginning of creation, we heard the words, "It is good." Throughout time and space, the one in whom we follow, Jesus, showed love to all people at all times, in all spaces and in all places. When others looked at one another and said, "There is no love, there is no good," they are not lovable, there is not goodness. And yet Jesus said, "You are loved." And so we gather here in this space, in this time in which we live and we breathe together, seeking to be filled with just that love that is carried on in the midst of time and space and goes beyond time and space. And may we hear in this time together a message that is rooted in the ground of our being, which is the love and goodness of all of creation, so that when we leave this place and we move into the next moments, we may not just feel that we are loved and believe that we are loved for the people that we are, but may we be that love, share that love, and offer that love to all, whomever we meet, in whatever time and space we come together. We pray these things in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
Hi. I'm going to be sharing with you another original of mine, which I'm very excited about. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to these musicians back here. If we could give them a round of applause. They're incredible. And they've been gracious enough to learn my music and give it a life that I couldn't imagine on my own. So I'm really excited to share that with you guys today.
Twists and turns with no way out, lost in my imagination. Thoughts go round and round with no apparent destination. Outside my mind it's just confusion. My word can't figure it out. Where is the love? Where is the kindness, as we all make our way to our apparent destination. The path that's traveled is the better one. It's long and narrow, not for everyone. Create your own journey, there's no need to worry, 'cause it's done. Souls as they dance around, yet every one of them so cautious to stay in line on their way to their apparent destination. To stay in line on their way to their apparent destination. Pick up what you need. What you need, no caution to the wind, 'cause nothing's guaranteed. Tell all who you know, tell all who you know. Let fish go with the flow. The path is
We're so fortunate to have Kagan with us, and all of her creativity and just her spirit and presence and insight. Brad and I have been having a lot of fun having her as part of our planning team now. And already, people around the church are sort of noticing her. I don't know how that is, but you can't go anywhere else. All right. So, but she'll be singing, by the way, with the band, it's the Gathering Band. She'll be singing with them for some of the conference events today, and this week, because somebody heard about her. And then she's also told me that she's basically, after the rehearsal today with them, going to stick around and help set up stuff for the conference. What's the matter with you? So she's just being a great example for all the rest of us. I'll see you at 6:30. Anyway, so... So I didn't actually plan. You know, this is the beautiful thing about 11:11 too, which is really sort of this open, creative spirit that allows ourselves to kind of participate with what's happening in the moment. We have ideas. We know kind of a general direction. We have an apparent destination. And then we realize, oh, wait, it's more apparent than I realized it was. So she sang this song, and then I came up with this image that right here that I decided 2 nights ago, or actually I think it was 2 nights ago, to use as the title picture, and hadn't even really thought about the song Apparent Destination. So I just love the way spirit, if you will, creativity works in the midst of us. So I want to just quickly get back to the dog thing. So we all know all dogs go to heaven, right? So God was in the throne up in heaven, and a couple of dogs and a cat showed up, and they came to the gate, and God saw a Doberman Pinscher and said, so come on in, but tell me about yourself. And the Doberman Pinscher said, well, I've been a good guard dog. I've taken care and protected my owner and the family, and I've just made sure everybody's safe. And I've always been very obedient. And so God said, well, that's awesome. That's awesome. So you come and you sit on my right hand. And then came a golden retriever. And God said to the golden retriever, so tell me about your story. And the golden retriever said, well, I've been just a gentle presence with my family, and I've been there to comfort them, and I've been there to play with the kids, and I've just been there to kind of keep their spirits up. I've always been obedient, and I've tried to do my very best to be an example of joy in the world. And God said, that's amazing. Come on up and sit at my left hand. And then the cat came forward, and God said, tell me your story. And the cat said, I don't know, you're sitting in my chair. So if you're a cat owner, you know what we're talking about, right? So let's see this next picture. So we're thinking of 3 ways to think about God, and maybe a 4th. This is one of my favorite cartoonists and post-church theologians, the Naked Pastor. If you've never followed his work, just check out nakedpastor.com and see some of his interesting insights. Welcome to the faith. Now here's your complimentary box, outside of which you should never, ever think again. So we know what this is about. We know this experience. So many of us have had this experience and have kind of found ourselves as refugees along the way with no apparent destination. But it's at the same time, we realize there is a destination in some sense. It's just not exactly sure what it is. But here we are in this space that's filled with curiosity, that's filled with, at times, sort of a self-confrontation, self-examination, even a reckoning. And yet there's this openness that's really difficult sometimes to hold in balance as we try to make our way along this destination. And so for me, this was really kind of been my journey, is kind of coming from that place that I joined, that church that I joined back in the day, that had a very clear sense of what the box was and what goes in the box, and nothing ever else goes in that box, and you never question or take anything out of that box. That box is everything. Which is, right up front, I will say something that I think I've learned over the years about tradition, about doctrines, about orthodoxy, all of that stuff. I rather like to think of orthodoxy as a flexible, sort of a flexible guide, not even a guideline of sorts, but a flexible relationship to the mystery that's intentional, right? That's intentional. That becomes kind of a modified or improvisational or an experiential orthodoxy. The problem with the box containing only everything is that that's called static, or also known in science as inert, or also known in biology as dead. So if we have a static faith, it's a dead faith. And what's the problem when you get around a dead faith? Well, you know what the problem is. When you get around a dead faith, it's toxic because it decays, and it creates this tension around it. And everyone basically is repelled by it and runs away from it. And that's the challenge, I think. That's really the challenge, is to be able to be present when you're in the midst of toxic realities. That's also a dynamic experience of faith. So we're going to look at 3 ways to look at faith, to look at God, because I think it speaks to who we are. And I think it actually, if you just want to play around with it, it also speaks to who your dog is, or your cat. But that's a little bit of a side thought. And I'm going to use this idea of the Wizard of Oz because basically Dorothy, and then she meets the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the lion, the Cowardly Lion, and they're on this journey. She runs into all sorts of other issues, right? It's a classic sort of journey story with all the different motifs of dangers and obstacles and wisdom and teachings and gifts. And then she makes her way eventually to the land of Oz. But the crisis literally puts her into a tailspin where she ends up in an unfamiliar reality, which I want you to think about right now. What are those realities, right? 2 years of COVID, a pandemic that killed over 1 million people in America, 6 million around the world, millions of people sick, continuing to get sick, anxieties just around that, realities of all sorts of economic and social consequences because of that. I mean, we find ourselves in a tailspin of all sorts of unfamiliar realities around us. The vitriol in our country has increased rather than decreased, which Linda and I, back in the beginning of the pandemic, if you remember, we started doing sermons together, and I remember talking about this is a reset. I even had that title of that series called The Reset, because it was an idea that was kind of an opportunity to rethink who we are in relation to nature, to life, to where we are in the world. And of course, we didn't do that. I mean, some of us definitely did. Absolutely, many of us did. But the country as a whole continued to sort of move forward in this, as I've called it last week, this toxic, dysfunctional reality of right and wrong, of binary ways of living in the world. And the reality is that we find ourselves in this binary way because we're so oriented to what we keep in our box. Whether it's our faith or our ideology or identity or whatever, we keep it in the box so we can't see anything else. So here's the first thing. There's 3 or 4 different ways to think about God that is pretty common, I think pretty universal to those of us as Christians, Judeo-Christians even. The first one is God as a being. Now, when I say that, I don't mean God as a being or as being. I mean specifically as a thing, as an object, as a being. And most of us grow up with that because we grow up as children. We grow up with this idea that God is kind of like Santa Claus. Santa Claus is very different. We get that picture. But as little children, think about it. No, you don't. As little children, it's really hard to distinguish between Santa Claus and God. And so if we're lucky and we go to church, we start getting some of that distinction. But the reality is we live in a country of prosperity. We live in a country where if you're pretty much white and grow up in middle America or in certain parts of America, you pretty much get whatever you want from Santa, right? So we live with this privileged kind of understanding of deity. So God is a being. But if we're not careful, what we find out is we put God in a box. But it's God in a box that we like until something goes wrong, and then we have to question what's inside that box. But most of us, again, for the most part, don't ever have to question it because, again, for most of us, the only thing we really, truly have to deal with is an occasional crisis, first world kinds of problems, and maybe our own death and mortality, which I invite you to think about every day, 5 times a day. I've told you about that app, and I encourage you. You think I'm silly, but I encourage you. That's amazing. We croak. It's going to be on my new license plate, by the way, just driving around town, reminding everybody, we all die. Just remember that. All this fuss you're making, we all die. Just remember that. How to live now. Okay, anyway, I'm off track. All right, so here's the next thing. This is how we sometimes think of God. I'm normally not a praying man, but if you're up there, please save me, Superman. We often think of God as basically a better, bigger, powerful, more awesome, and for some of us more judgmental, and for some of us more vengeful version of ourselves. Karl Barth had this wonderful quote. He said, when we talk about God, it's like we're talking about ourselves with a megaphone. Karl Barth said that. I used to not like Karl Barth. Karl Barth said that. There's this idea that God ends up hating the people we hate, right? That God likes the people we like. God's uncomfortable with what we're uncomfortable with. God wants the world to be like we want it. Which if we really get and step away from it, we realize that what's going on, not just within the world around us, but within our own denomination. Oh, sidebar, denomination. Do you know what denomination actually means? Literally, denomination means to break down, to rename. We think of it as a naming, but it actually means to name something new. So denominations are constantly being named as a consequence of what they are not, right? Denominations form in relationship to a decision of what it's not. So in a way, if you think about it, when denominations form intentionally, oftentimes they start with a negativity. They often start with defining themselves in terms of their box. And that's what we face time and time and time again. I didn't realize this, but I think there's like 80 different denominations of the Methodist Church. 80 different, that's not who we are. Right? It just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which is what happens with boxes. So the danger of making God a projection of ourselves is that we easily begin to justify anything as God, because what we've done now is that we've idolized what's in the box, or we've identified ourselves so limited by what's in the box, because that's what we need, is we need to be very much identified with something very protected and very concrete and defined, that we then don't really see what reality is. We now only see what we have projected. And that's the challenge, because it gets all mixed up in everything else. Patriotism, nationalism, economy, social. I mean, it gets literally bound up in everything else we do. So while I want to say that there are overlapping realities here and how we look at God, and I want to encourage you not to think about it. Which one of these am I? But in reality, we're kind of a little bit of all of these things. Because if we find ourselves sometimes in a desperate situation, I guarantee for me, I'm probably going to start praying and saying, God, if you're up there, would you do something right now? Would you help me? I mean, we don't like being in helpless realities in situations that are overwhelming. It takes a lot of depth and a lot of spiritual traveling to realize that we actually rest and live and move and have our being in that reality. We want something else to fix it for us. So there's a lot of this that overlaps. The second way that we understand ourselves sometimes, that we understand God, I think, is in terms of God as hyper-being. Now, we probably come very close to seeing God as hyper-being in here in terms of some of our ritual practices, but I think there's also something else that we go beyond that. But in terms of hyper-being, Anselm put it this way, the 12th century Bishop of Canterbury. He said, God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Hyper-being is this idea that God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Now, don't think about this. Don't go to this idea that then God's the greatest thing I can conceive. You know why? Guess why? Because you're conceiving it. God is greater than, is that than which nothing greater can be. In other words, stop trying to peg what God is and be more present. That's the challenge of mysticism, is to try to be more present to what God might be. What I love about this text from the Exodus is here's God and Moses and the Israelites in the story. They've been journeying now for years and years and years after freedom from Egypt, right? So now we're in the 33rd chapter, and we're not far from what should be the promised land, this powerful, powerful story. And God's been there all along. God saved them. God rescued them, right? God has been there in a God as being way. And then Moses says, so can I see you? And God says, no, you can't see me. I mean, early on, God says, I am what I am. I'm going to do what I do. I'll be what I'll be. But Moses is saying, well, I love how, now we don't often read it this way. We often read it as saying that God says, I'm going to go along with you. Well, yeah, but read the rest of it. Moses is sitting there bargaining with him. Moses is saying, like, if I'm going to go forward, I really need to know who it is I'm going forward with. And it's like God saying, like, really? All these years? Really? You need to know what you're living in the midst of? And Moses says, yeah, let me just know that you're there so that I can assure the people that you're there. And God says, I'm not going to do that. You can't see me. All you will be able to see, now, literally it means is my backside. But if you really think about what's being said there, all that you can see is is the consequence of God's presence. That's what you get to see. The after effect, the consequence of God's presence. God was in this place. Now, how do you know that's the case? That's the challenge of mysticism, right? How do you know that's the case? Moses isn't given a clear, definitive answer. Moses is just told, I'm going to be what I'm going to be, and you get to see where I've been, essentially. But you don't get to see me. It's left up as a mystery. And then we get to the New Testament story, which I love because it's the same question several thousand years later. They're asking Jesus in the Gospel of John, which is a mystical gospel, right, written some 100 years after Jesus' death or 90 years after Jesus' death. And this community is saying, okay, well, what do we think about Jesus now? Because Jesus didn't come back immediately to establish the new kingdom, so now what do we think about Jesus? And so they ask in this story, show us the Father. And what does Jesus say? Have you been with me this whole time? You don't know what God looks like? You've been walking, where have you been? And at the very end, he says something very important. He says, this is what God looks like. You love like I love, you see God. You love like I love, you're in God. God is in you. You're part of that reality. So there's this aspect of the hyper real, the hyper God, as hyper being, that is mystery. But there's still something further that I want to suggest is kind of closer to what I think or where we are. Maybe if you think about it almost as a progression of your spiritual maturity as you progress in your faith, you kind of go through these places, right? It's almost like children to adulthood, concrete stage, and then you get to the, past the literal stage into the thinking, cognitive stage, and then you get into the more mystical, mature, responsibility kind of stage. So I think there's some of that going on here as we think about how we look at God. So, the one thing I want to say about this last thing here before we get into these last two is in Russia, in the early Christian community in Russia, they had a great practice. Because they were so concerned about everything they would create that they thought was a symbol of God would become idolatry, they dug a hole in the side of the wall and said, that's God. And they became kind of known slang as the worshipers of the empty hole. But if you think about it, their challenge was they intentionally decided not to try to peg God in a box, not to try to determine and define God, but more to live out of that mystical kind of reality that they experienced when they would give themselves over to that process. Now we call that, in a lot of ways, we call that theopoetics. When we read Rumi in here, we're reading a poetic expression of what God might be, because we have no idea. We only have some idea in terms of what we can see from the stories of Scripture, but also what we can see from experience. Or as what John Wesley would say, also from tradition and also from reason. Incidentally, that fourfold norm that we've talked about many times in here, you know what's the problem of trying to keep God in a box? Think about women and their progress in society. Think about African Americans, people of color, and their gradual progress as they continue to kind of try to find new ground of freedom. What are they doing? They are breaking the ceiling every time, right? Because we try to keep people in a box. We try to keep God in a box.
Well, when is enough enough?
When is enough enough? That's a great question. When is enough enough? We're going into that. That's our third vision of what God might be. That's a good question to ask. When is enough enough? Man, I've asked that question a lot of times. That's what's going on in our denomination. Nobody wants to see that ceiling broken. Yet there's no way not to break it, right? Because if you don't, you just stagnate. So here's the last one. Well, there's actually another one, but we'll see if we get to that. The Apostle Paul in the book of Acts wrote, when he was talking to the Greeks in Romans at the Roman Parthenon, and he was where all the Greeks and all the philosophers would gather, he noticed all the statues of all the gods. And you know the passage where he said, this God that you worship and this unknown God that you have a statue to, this is the God that we worship. But there's no name. And Paul doesn't say this God has a name and his name is Yahweh or Elohim or he's the Lord of all or the Creator. He doesn't say that. What Paul says is, this is the God who is the ground of your being. The God, the one in whom you live and move and have all your being. In other words, everything. And yet, more than that. Paul Tillich in the 40s and the 50s came up with a term called the ground of being. God is ground of being, which is to say that God is rooted in, God appears, would I have this quote up there? I don't think I do. Okay. The courage to be, which is Paul Tillich's phrase, what it is, there it is. The courage to be is rooted in the God who appears when God has disappeared in the anxiety of doubt. Do you know what that means? In other words, when you can step out of your box, when you can say, I don't need this box, I'm going to live courageously in the moment, I'm going to live into the moment vulnerably and compassionately kindness, generosity. I'm going to live with an openness, with curiosity. When you've stepped out of that box of anxiety, you've stepped into the realm of courage. You've stepped in the realm of courage to be. And that's difficult. Because when I'm on Facebook and I post things that I really believe in deeply and then I start getting vitriolic responses, I want to go, what's the matter with you? Why are you being so hateful? I don't like people hating me, right? I mean, I start getting that way. I get defensive. I want my box back. Or I want the people who have a box like mine so that we can all get in our box together. And now I've stepped out of God as the ground of being and I'm back into God as my box. I'm back to God as a being, even though I don't necessarily believe it. Because why? Because I'm afraid. That's our natural neurological tendency. It's our default. It's our trigger. We're going to go there. So it takes practice to be curious. It takes practice to step out. It takes practice for me to go and search down that guy's profile and go, I wonder if he and I actually like some similar things. And literally go through all of his likes or go through all of his favorite things or the things that he follows and literally look at them and then suddenly realize, oh my gosh, we have this same common interest. Look at that. Look at how we connect here. What's possible here? Now you think, why would I even want to do that? Why would I even decide that that's important? Because Jesus said if you want to experience God, the only way to do it is to love. And love is not charity. Charity is a form of love, sure, but love is not really charity. Love is courageous curiosity. It's fierce curiosity, being willing to go where you haven't gone before, to be in a place where you haven't been before, to see if there's some word of, oh yeah, how did I not see this? Who would have ever seen this before? Let's see what the last one is here, the next one. See if I'm there. The experience of God is not about how you get it, but how does the sacred presence of God get you? How does it catch you up? Right? Does that make sense? You go to art and you've already determined it's worthless or it's important or it doesn't speak to me. My son sent me this wonderful picture. You might have seen it, this wonderful little post, and it says, don't trust anyone. And then it says underneath that, turn this picture of a bird upside down. Now, my other son was like, I get it, that's just belong, and he starts laughing about it. And my wife, she says, oh, she turns it upside down, and she looks at it, and she says, there's nothing here. I don't see anything here. And I say, it says don't trust anyone. And she said, oh, yeah. And you know what I was doing? I was looking for what nobody else saw. I turned it upside down. If you looked really hard, it was a boar smoking a cigarette. It was an eye winking. It was all sorts of things. If you just turned it upside down, you're going like, oh, that's what it is. You see what the problem is because we get stuck in our boxes, we're not willing to go outside those boxes. Even when we're open-minded sometimes, we're not willing to go where it's a little uncomfortable, where it's a little unfamiliar. We're not willing to pursue curiosity to its divine possibility. And so that's the last one I want to suggest to you. And I think we're going to have to just skip on ahead because we're getting down to the end of our time here. All right, we know the story about Dorothy when she's talking to Glenda, and she says, I think it wasn't enough just to want to see Uncle and Henry and Aunt E.M. It's that if I ever go looking for my heart's desire again, I won't look any further than my own backyard, because if it isn't there, then I never really lost it in the first place. And of course, we know that's the point of the story, is that it was always there, right? She just didn't know how to look for it. She didn't know how to open it up because she was afraid. She was angry. She was defensive. She was confused. And so instead of opening that up, like we've talked about, suffering is keenly paying attention. Instead of opening it up, she ran, right? So we understand that. But here's what I want to suggest. The last one here, I think it's up there. Did I put it up there? Yes, I did. God is the redemptive possibilities in the moment. You want to think about where is God? You want to think about what it means to experience the depth and beauty of God? It's only when we dive into those moments that are awkward, that are difficult, that are unfamiliar, with curiosity and that vulnerability. Now, if you're of course, people will go to me with the foxhole illustration, and they'll go like, yeah, but what if I'm really suffering and I'm in pain? Well, go get it fixed, or go deal with that. Or what if somebody's really being violent to me? Well, don't stand there and start asking them questions about their favorite dogs. Right? You don't, if you see gun violence, you got to respond to things, right? We got to respond to the reality of our situation, but it's bigger than that. That's why we have the problems in the first place. We have to go there. That's what's so beautiful about this community, right? I loved it, how when Jessie gets up, and I forgot to tell her, I assumed you'd done this before, so I assumed, right? And then you came, have you? Okay, well then you don't have an excuse. I'm sorry, all right. I'm just sorry, all right. But what I love, in spite of all that, is who we are in here, right? Because we know we're refugees. We know that it's awkward and that the world is difficult and it's confusing, but we also know that we're all in this together because we share the same ground of being. No matter who we are, we all share the same ground of being. And so we celebrate that ground of being before we worry about celebrating who or what you are, because we know right in the heart of you is the Imago Dei, the ground of being, is who we are. We're all sacred and holy. The challenge I invite you all to continue to participate in this time that we're in is to just get a little more curious, push it a little further, and then try to see that for others to help them see it. Amen.
Time is getting harder and harder, more and more each day. Still I am determined, I'm never gonna change my way. Thinking about all the way it should be. You got to open your eyes and you will see all the way it should be. You got to make up your mind, you'll advance humanity. Humanity, yeah. What happened to the love that they are talking about? It's nothing but useless words coming out of their mouths, talking about how the way it should be. You gotta open your eyes, you will see how the way it should be. You gotta make up your mind, you'll advance humanity. Humanity, humanity, humanity. Oh. Hey. What happened to the love they're talking about? It's nothing but useless words coming out of their mouths. Think about how the way it should be. We gotta open our eyes, we will see how the way it should be. We gotta open our minds, really that's humanity. Oh, humanity, humanity, humanity. Listen, people, listen. Hey. Oh, listen what I'm saying to you. A little bit of justice and peace. The bringing in love for everyone. Hey. Oh, now you got the notion. You got the notion, you got the notion, you got the notion, get in the motion, get in the motion, hey, you got the notion, hey, 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 yeah, 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 yeah. You got the notion, oh, baby. You got the notion of soul. Hey, girl.
Okay, Well, good again to be with you all, and good to have you guys online, and that was awesome. I love that song. I hadn't heard that before. I mean, we picked it out, but it always is fun how well it works. So let's stand for our benediction, and I hope this week you get a chance to try to push yourselves a little further in your curiosity to those uncomfortable places, because that's where the being of God is, the ground of our being is. So also, some of you come up and talk to me afterwards and volunteer and help me next the end of the month for the Pride Week Festival, the Pride Festival. Hope you can join me with that. I know Kagan will, because she volunteers for everything. All right. So if you have the notion, our task is ended. Go in pieces. Ideas have been upended, but new ideas always invited and mended as we travel and unravel. Still, we travel together. In all of that, we begin to unravel the illusions, to expose some of the confusions, but to invite new solutions of ways that we can be together. So we go in pieces. Amen.